Okay, so one of the greatest things about married life is that you get to know the same person extremely well. However, that level of familiarity can have a downside if you don't take care of each other well. So today we're talking about fighting familiarity. Stay tuned.
Hi, we're Ryan and Selena Frederick. We've been married since college.
We've had lots of good times and plenty of bad.
We don't know everything about marriage, but what we do know, we'll share openly and honestly.
Welcome to Fierce Marriage.
So fighting familiarity in your marriage, you start out in the honeymoon phase. Everything's kind of new and fresh. And then the smoke starts lifting. The veils are lifted.
See behind the curtain.
You start seeing behind the curtain. You start seeing a little bit more of the humanity of your spouse, which is great, like Ryan said, because there's, you can speak to your spouse in a way that is either encouraging or can tear them down in such a terrible way. So how do we fight that? How do we not allow familiarity to take root in our heart and breed that contempt?
Yeah, so I think first thing to do is look at some scripture just so you know we're not making this stuff up. Matthew 12:34, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The NIV version is actually very interesting. It says, for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. In itself, the verse makes a lot of sense, but let's look at the context of it. Just real quickly, what was happening is Jesus was walking through a grain field with the disciples. The disciples were hungry. It was the Sabbath, which is, according to the Levitical law, it was a day of rest, right? And so they are, they're eating grain because they're hungry. And the Pharisees came up on them and said, hey, you're, breaking the law. How dare you do that? Basically
picking grain.
Yeah, they're working, picking it. And Jesus basically said,
reprimands
the Pharisees because they essentially, you go read Matthew 12 for yourself, but essentially they had missed the big picture. And he said, don't you know that someone greater is among you, and that mercy is better than sacrifice, is what he said. And basically what he's saying is that we can lose, the Pharisees had lost sight because they're so familiar with the law that they lost sight of this grand story, this grand picture, God's storyline of Jesus coming in to humanity, being injected into humanity to fulfill the law and save us. And they missed that because they were so familiar. And then you read down about 30 verses and you see this verse, and he's basically saying everything that is wrong with you comes from your heart. If the tree is bad, it's bad at the root, sort of thing. So how do we address this issue of familiarity and its harmful effects in a marriage? I think the first thing you have to do is look at your heart and look at, in other words, how well do you understand the gospel and what Jesus has done and who he says you are, but even as importantly, who he says your spouse is. And that will forever impact both your own security, your own need to pick at those flaws and your own need to be satisfied and feeling justified. But you can actually extend grace because you've been extended grace. Yeah. What's really cool is you start to see your spouse as this child of God who he loved just as much as he loved you. He died for them just as much as he died for you. How dare you treat them in a way that's hurtful on purpose? You have to keep that big picture in mind. So what are some ways that familiarity kind of works itself out?
Well, some practical ways that we can kind of overcome that familiarity, by reading the Bible and letting Scripture read us, really letting it transform our hearts and letting Jesus do what only he can do. But also simple things that flow out of that are gratefulness. Yeah. At least for wives, I think that's probably one of the things we struggle, or at least I struggle with, and I want to make sure that he knows that when I speak to him and I express my thankfulness for the way he's active with our kids and how much he is involved and loving and kind in his words. He knows my love languages. He knows how to fill my bucket. And so it's not just one way, though. I need to know that about him because, again, that familiarity, knowing, what speaks to his heart may not speak to obviously your spouse or your husband, but your spouse, know what speaks to their heart, what fills their bucket, and giving to them is not, it's not a weakness. It's not it's a strength to invest and give that to them. And not that this is the motivation, this is a blessing on top, but then it's reciprocated back. And you just kind of see this cycle of generosity growing out of this abundance of what God's done in your heart and what God could, what the gospel and Jesus, the message of just him saving us, continues to wash over us. So again, simple things of words of gratitude and expression, thoughtfulness, he likes to go on adventures. So for his birthday, we try to do fun adventures, you know. He's pretty easy to please for the most part.
So thank you for that. And I think for husbands, I think for us it's pursuing our spouse, just like we did when we first saw them and decided to try and get that first date. That's what we mean by keep dating your spouse, keep pursuing them. So as a man, I can I'm always I always say this. My wife is a maze where the walls continue to change, right? So I'm still figuring it out, but and that's the part of the pursuit and really dating her. So it's really easy to get home from work and just plop down on the couch and put forth minimal effort because you just spent all day working or putting physical energy, mental energy into your job. That's not okay. You need to continue to pursue each other, taking each other on dates, giving gifts, doing things that only you can do because you know them better than anyone.
And as a wife, identifying, maybe he's got an extra long week at work, and how can I maybe be thoughtful and make his favorite dinner and say, hey, why don't you just hang out and watch TV for a bit, and I'll take care of the kids. Let's just get you to a better place where you feel like you can kind of pour out and just kind of let him breathe and rest, and knowing that might speak to him, or maybe having something planned. If it's a nice day, go eat outside, just being thoughtful and mindful, I guess.
Yeah. And I think familiarity actually presents itself in smaller ways. So common courtesies, letting your spouse finish their sentences without interrupting them, trying to actually hear their words for what their heart is saying, not just hearing their words and assuming what they mean, but actually processing things. Common courtesies, men opening doors and pulling out chairs for your spouse. I mean, nobody talks about that, but that's such an endearing thing as a husband. And wives, it's the same thing like Selena just said, using your words very intentionally to build each other up and not being lazy with your communication. So we could go on and on and on, but the big idea here is to not lose sight of the gospel and what Jesus has done on the cross and how that assigns your identity both to you and to your spouse. And the deeper you get into knowing each other, the deeper your opportunity to love each other really intentionally, but also knowing the other side of that sword is you can also hurt each other very deeply. So just know that and don't lose sight of that big picture. I think that's it for today. Go ahead and subscribe to us on YouTube. Get the videos first, and we'll try to keep these things coming as much as we can. All right, talk to you later. See ya.